All right, so let's talk about what's going on up north in Canada. With all this talk about immigration and even potential mass deportations, it's getting pretty heated up there. And a lot of you have asked us to take a deep dive into it. So we've got some articles, some research, even a transcript from a YouTube video. And we're going to break it all down. We'll see what we can make sense of. We've got some pretty wild numbers being thrown around, concerns about the economy. Could even play a major role in the upcoming election. So, yeah, should be interesting.
Yeah, the timing of all this is really fascinating. With the election coming up, immigration has become, well, a key battleground. You've got Justin Trudeau, the current prime minister, taking a more liberal approach, as you know, and then you've got Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader, taking a much harder line. It's going to be quite a showdown.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it then. I'm looking at this YouTube video here titled Mass Deportations in Canada. Is this just clickbait? Or is this something we should really be concerned about?
Well, it definitely grabs your attention, that's for sure. I mean, mass deportations, who wouldn't click on that? But yeah, there is something more to it. Poilievre is calling for a major policy shift, wanting to deport a large number of people who, he says, shouldn't be in Canada. And it's causing a huge debate. Some people are all for it, others are really worried.
Yeah, and it's not just the YouTube video. All the sources we've got are throwing around some pretty wild numbers. Poilievre's side claims there are like anywhere between 20,000 and 500,000 people in Canada right now who they say shouldn't be there. And then they're saying another 3 million might need to leave next year because their visas are going to expire. I mean, hold on, those numbers are so different. Like, how is it even possible?
Right. It's a huge range. It really comes down to how they're calculating those numbers and, well, who's doing the estimating. You see, there's no perfect system in place to track everyone entering and leaving Canada in real time. So academic sources, the government, and political parties might all end up with different figures, and that lack of clear data just adds fuel to the fire.
Okay, so it's kind of like everyone's just picking the numbers that fit their narrative. But what about Trudeau's response to all this? From what I've read, he's basically saying, relax, we've got systems in place. Most people leave voluntarily when their visas expire. Is he being realistic here?
Well, Canada does have procedures in place, that's true, but there's no denying that the lack of precise data makes it tough to, really prove how effective those procedures are. And that uncertainty, that's what lets Poilievre keep hammering on this out-of-control narrative.
Right. Okay, so let's play devil's advocate for a minute. What about Poilievre's argument that all these visa overstays are hurting the economy and that they're putting a strain on social services? Is there any truth to that?
So this is where things get really complex. Poilievre's tapping into some very real anxieties people have. Anxieties about jobs, about housing, about healthcare. And those anxieties are especially strong for people who are already struggling.
Yeah, so he's speaking to their fears.
Yeah, he's essentially saying we need to take care of our own citizens first. And that message really resonates with people who are feeling the squeeze,
I get it.
It's that whole us versus them mentality. It's a powerful narrative.
Okay, so we've talked about Poilievre's argument that Trudeau is weak and indecisive and that he's not protecting Canada's borders. But what about the other side? What are the arguments against mass deportations?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the potential disruption it would cause. Think about communities and businesses, especially if a lot of people who are working, contributing to the economy, are suddenly removed.
Yeah, so it's not just a humanitarian issue, it's an economic one too.
Exactly. And then there are the ethical considerations. I mean, how do you even go about removing that many people, and is it even cost effective? Plus, critics argue that it goes against Canada's image as a welcoming and inclusive nation.
Okay, and our sources also mention how all this ties into these bigger issues Canada's facing, like the economy, the cost of housing, people just struggling to get by. Is Poilievre just using immigration as a scapegoat then?
It's more nuanced than that.
I figure.
Immigration is definitely a legitimate topic to discuss, but Poilievre is strategically linking it to these other anxieties to create a powerful narrative. And yeah, it could be seen as divisive.
Okay, so we've got Trudeau saying, we've got this, everything's under control. And then we've got Poilievre saying, it's chaos, we need to take back control.
That's a good summary.
Two very different perspectives. And with the election coming up, this is going to be a key issue for voters to consider.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here, but we're just getting started. We'll be right back to dive even deeper into this crucial debate and what it means for the future of Canada. Stay with us.
As we dig deeper into all this, it's important to remember that we're not just talking about numbers and policies. We're talking about people, families, communities. Their lives are directly affected by how this all plays out. right? Their whole future. And even beyond that, this whole debate raises some really big questions about what it means to be Canadian. What are their values? What are their obligations to their own citizens and to the world? It's pretty deep stuff.
Yeah, these are questions that every country is facing now. I mean, the world's becoming more and more interconnected with globalization and more people moving around. So how do you balance economic growth with keeping society together? How do you balance national identity with global responsibility?
Man, that's a lot. And looking at the sources, it seems like this debate is splitting Canadian society. For example, business groups seem pretty worried about the economic impact of all this talk about deportations.
Right. A lot of sectors in Canada rely on temporary foreign workers. Think about agriculture, construction, even tech. Removing a chunk of the workforce could lead to labor shortages, supply chains getting messed up. It could really hurt the economy.
But then you've got some labor unions actually supporting Poilievre. They're saying that immigration is driving wages down and pushing Canadian workers out of jobs.
Yeah, see, that's where the economics of it all gets super complicated. Immigration does have an effect on the job market, no doubt. But how big of an effect? And is it good or bad? That's what everyone's arguing about. Some economists say immigration actually helps the economy grow overall, that it creates new jobs and increases demand. But others say no, in certain sectors it can lead to wages staying low or people losing their jobs.
So it's like, how do you balance the good with the concerns of people who feel like they're losing out? And this isn't just happening in Canada. We're seeing the same kind of debates all over the world.
Absolutely. Look at what's happening in Europe with refugees and asylum seekers, or in the US with border security and how people can become citizens. It's a tough issue everywhere.
It really is.
Yeah.
One of the articles you sent mentioned how this debate could get pretty ugly, especially with the election coming up.
Yeah, I mean, immigration is a really personal issue. It's about identity, belonging, opportunity. When those things are at stake, people get emotional, and things can turn nasty pretty quickly. Especially these days with social media, where the loudest voices tend to be the most extreme.
Right, it's like everyone's shouting at each other. And even if Poilievre doesn't win, all this talk can cause some real damage. It can divide communities, make people intolerant of immigrants and minorities.
That's the danger. That's why we need to talk about this stuff in a way that's nuanced and empathetic. We need to see that there are valid concerns on both sides. The challenge is to figure out how to address those concerns without resorting to the kind of rhetoric that tears people apart.
It's a tough balance to strike. And you know, one thing that struck me is how this whole debate seems to be splitting Canadians along generational lines. Younger people who grew up in a more diverse society seem more open to immigration, but older generations seem more worried about its impact.
Yeah, that's interesting. Generational differences definitely play a role here. Younger people tend to have more diverse friends and are more exposed to different cultures, so they're more accepting. Older generations might have grown up in more homogenous communities, so change can be scary. I think understanding those different perspectives is really important if we want to find common ground.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget about the election. This issue could actually determine who wins.
Oh, for sure. Poilievre's tapped into a lot of anxiety and frustration, and his message is clearly resonating with some people. The question is, will it be enough to win him the election?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. It'll be interesting to see how Trudeau responds. He needs to address those concerns people have about the economy and being left behind. But he also needs to stick to his message of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act.
It is.
He needs to find a way to bring people together, to create a vision for Canada that includes everyone.
With the election so close, this debate is about to get even more intense. So what do you think? What are some potential outcomes? And what could this all mean for Canada in the long run?
Well, let's take a moment to gather our thoughts, and then we can dive back in and explore those questions.
All right, so we're back and ready to wrap up this deep dive into Canada's immigration debate. We've covered a lot. The numbers, the economic arguments, those anxieties driving it all, and of course the political battle lines. It's complicated, to say the least.
It really is. And you know, it shows how something that seems like a local issue can actually reflect these global trends. I mean, Canada's not alone here. Lots of countries are struggling with similar tensions around immigration.
Right, it's everywhere. So, big picture here, how do you see this debate shaping Canada's future, regardless of who wins the election?
Well, one possibility is that it just makes Canadian society even more divided. If Poilievre wins and puts his policies into place, we could see a big shift in how Canada approaches immigration. It could become much more restrictive, less welcoming to newcomers, and that could lead to more social divisions, economic uncertainty, even damage Canada's reputation internationally.
Okay, so that's one scenario. But what if Trudeau wins? Is this just a temporary pause on all these anxieties? Or is there a way for Canada to address these concerns without resorting to, all the divisive rhetoric?
That's the big question, isn't it? Even if Trudeau wins, he can't just ignore the people who feel like they're being left behind. By globalization, by economic change, he has to find a way to bridge that gap, to create a vision for Canada that includes everyone. Maybe that means policies that address income inequality, that promote social cohesion, a sense of belonging for all Canadians, no matter where they come from.
That sounds, pretty ambitious, especially in the current political climate. But, going back to the sources we looked at, one thing that really stuck with me was the idea that this debate is about more than just immigration. It's about what kind of country Canada wants to be in the 21st century.
Exactly. It's about defining Canadian identity in a world that's changing so fast. How do you balance economic anxieties with humanitarian values? How do you preserve national traditions while embracing diversity?
Yeah, those are some big questions. And I'm guessing they're not going to be answered overnight.
Definitely not. And maybe not even within this election cycle. These are ongoing conversations. They're going to keep shaping Canada for years to come. But I think if Canadians can have these conversations thoughtfully, respectfully, if they can listen to each other, then they can find a way forward, a way that honors their values and their interests.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners too. This debate is far from over. But by understanding the complexities, the human stories behind all the statistics, and by talking to each other respectfully, we can all play a role in shaping a future for Canada, a future that's inclusive and prosperous for everyone. So to everyone listening, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep thinking critically about these issues. This conversation is going to shape Canada's future, and your voice matters. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive on Tell Us.